Welcome ladies and gentlemen, my name's Dychronic here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to take a look at one of my favorite PvP Hunter builds that revolves around the Stasis Revenant Darkness subclass that came out with Beyond Light. Now right off the bat I want to address the fact that a lot of people will probably realize that this is not a uncommon build, it's not something that's that new. A lot of people have been using a lot of what makes this great for a very long time, or for at least the last few months. And even though we're at the end of the season, literally the last week and probably last few days of the season, I still think that this build is going to be very strong next season. From what Bungie has told us, there's not going to be a lot of major changes going on in PvP. The biggest things that will impact this build is the fact that the artifact is going to have a number of changes to it. We may not have the same hand cannon builds or hand cannon artifact mods we have this season. And the second one is that there's going to be a new aspect for all of the classes we're also going to be getting, so the number of fragments or what we want in builds may change very slightly, but for the most part, this build is still going to be really good. And from what I understand, probably one of the best in PvP right now. To give you an idea of what this build is about, this build focuses on using and getting your slowing melee abilities in most interactions to cripple enemies, shatter diving your glacier walls, which works even post nerf, and using S tier weapons in the current meta, as well as the multiple fragments, stats, and mods that improve these things. And if you've been playing a lot of PvP, you'll notice that a lot of people are using a lot of what makes this great. And of course, big shout out to my buddy Zoomzy for helping me come up with this build, as well as all the gameplay you can see on screen right now. Please check out his Twitch in the description down below. He used to be a Halo pro, used to compete in tournaments, so he's really good, and you should definitely check him out. Moving on, let's go ahead and get into the specs of this build. First and foremost, we have the class and subclass, which is obviously going to be a Hunter Stasis Revenant. For the aspects, there are only two options, which is Shatter Dive and Winter's Shroud. Both of these are very important for the build. The fragments I chose are going to be Fissures and Shards. These are very much based on the grenade you choose. I have an alternative with the Dome Grenade I'll talk about a little bit later. And for the rest of it, I'm using Glacier Grenade, Withering Blade, Gambler's Dodge, and Triple Jump. Moving on to the guns, my personal preference for the kinetic slot, I like going with a 120 hand cannon like True Prophecy or Steady Hand. In the energy slot, I like a lightweight shotgun like the CQC-12 or the Xena class. And finally, in the heavy slot, since we haven't used an exotic, obviously Wardcliff Coil is going to be the best bet. Alternatively, any of the grenade launchers doing well. And these weapon choices are very specifically chosen because they are the S tier weapons in the current meta. True Prophecy, CQC-12, and Wardcliff Coil are like top 3 weapons in each of their categories, and they're incredible. You obviously can make changes, but these are just my recommendations. Up next, let's talk about the armor. Oftentimes the most sophisticated and important part of any build really makes you you. On screen right now you can see how I personally built my build based on making it a fully optimized build, as optimized as I possibly could. Obviously you need to make changes to your build based on your stat distribution, based on your needs, your resources. This is just my personal recommendation and how I fully optimized it. Oftentimes it's more important that you have the right stuff in your build and not that you have full 10 out of 10 used in every slot. There's going to be a couple of main takeaways from this. First and foremost, the exotic choice is going to be the Mask of Bakris, which is a new exotic that significantly improves your dodge to travel farther, completely avoid damage during the blink, and have weapons ready immediately after use, allowing you to have very aggressive and defensive options in the use of the exotic. Beyond that, there's pretty standard stuff based on the weapons used, hand cannons and shotguns, and a pretty standard charge with light build that is missing stacks on stacks because I preferred using certain mods in the arms. But honestly, the number of people using Powerful Friends and Radiant Light right now, you're going to get plenty of charge of light from your team in a 6v6. And finally, when it comes to the stats, firstly, recovery should be either 9 or 10. It's probably the most important stat for both PvE and PvP a lot of people overlook. Secondly, mobility at 8 is going to be the best bet because if you're using a lightweight shotgun, that actually moves that up to 10, helping your dodge cooldown and your mobility. Thirdly, resilience at 5 is pretty much across the board for anything you're doing in PvP. You want a resilience at 5 so you can resist stasis, get out of stasis faster, and it helps you resist getting 2-bodied in one headshot by 120 hand cannons. Beyond that, you would also like a pretty high strength, like 7+. You also want a little bit of discipline, so like 4 to 5, but obviously you can get away with having lower discipline if you have something like Impact Induction. And finally, intellect can be anything. You should keep in mind that certain fragments will give or take certain stats, like shards giving you plus 10 resilience. Up next, let's talk about the gameplay, because how you use this build is going to be just as important as how you build it. To reiterate a few things, again, this is an aggressive and defensive build based on your playstyle that is based on using your slowing melee ability to cripple enemies, shatter diving your glacier walls, and using S tier meta weapon. And the general flowchart is anytime you see an enemy, throw your melee ability at them, and they will have their movement speed slowered, their accuracy and weapon speed lowered, they will be unable to jump, dodge, dash, sprint, or slide, and your melee will also seek towards targets and bounce off of surfaces and other enemies. If there are multiple enemies in front of you, you will want to use and Shatter Dive your Glacier Grenades for a good AoE burst. Even post-nerf, it is worse, but still usable. Your dodge can be used either aggressively to approach enemies with your shotgun or defensively to completely avoid all damage from an attack. In both instances, your weapons and abilities will be ready instantly after you finish blinking. And again, keep in mind that your dodge will take 10 seconds longer to charge than normal with the Mask of Bakris, and while you're blinking, you actually get your melee back with Gambler's Dodge, which is very important. And finally, your super is used mainly as an anti-super and also for groups and zoning. Really just use it whenever you're most comfortable. Oftentimes, people will stay away from objectives for a very long time while waiting out your Stasis Tornado, which can be the difference of a win in objective play. Up next for your weapons, first up your primary weapon. True Prophecy or any 120 RPM hand cannon is used in close to mid-long range and is an excellent primary use weapon for its superior accuracy and range as compared to the 140 RPM hand cannons. And it's also easier to use because it does a 2 body shot, 1 headshot kill for the optimal time to kill against enemies with 4 resilience or less. It also only needs 1 major damage bonus, for example like charge or light high energy fire, to get the optimal 2 headshot kill, whereas the 140s need 2 of those major damage bonuses. Your special weapon, the CQC-12, is very important for giving you plus 20 mobility, which is very useful for Hunter's dodge cooldown and general mobility. And as long as you can get full choke on your lightweight weapon, they'll be very usable and very competitive against the Felwinter's Lie. On top of the fact that shotguns are still very strong in this current meta because snipers had been nerfed at the beginning of the season. And finally, your heavy, the Wardcliff Coil, is chosen because it's the best PvP heavy for anti-super groups and easy kills. If you don't use an exotic for anything else, Wardcliff Coil is just the best choice. And lastly, when it comes to counters to this build, of which there really aren't that many, the first of which is being outranged or zoned by defensive enemies. The 120 hand cannons have a pretty high range, it can handle a lot of things, but there are certain enemies with snipers and scout rifles you may be outranged by, on top of the fact of not being able to get close enough to get the aim assistance of your shuriken, which is a big part of the build. And the other counter to this build is honestly another Mask of Bakris enemy that can blink out of your Shatter Dive burst or away from your blink approach. This is kind of a fight of fire with fire situation. This build is perhaps a little bit too strong. And finally, let's talk about the alternatives. There are a few alternatives to your weapons, armor mods, and subclass. Firstly, you can use many different weapons or weapon types. I personally chose the 120 hand cannons as they're very strong in the current meta and also have artifact mods to support them. Just make sure you make the appropriate changes to your armor mods whenever you switch weapons. Your subclass cannot really be changed as it is built around the subclass's ability. However, obviously you can make your jump whatever you want. And your grenade can also be switched to the Dustfield Grenade, which is the Dome Grenade, and selecting the fragments Durance and Refraction instead. Your exotic armor is also not really a critical part of this build, but is very strong and works very well with Winter's Shroud aspect. If you're looking for an alternative because you don't have it or you don't like it, an alternative exotic would be something like Stompies or Wormhusk Crown for people who are aggressive and defensive respectively. And finally, there are a bunch of changes that can be made to your armor mods, changing impact induction to momentum transfer, adding a shotgun targeting which helps with the cone of the shotgun shots, replacing the hand cannon loader with another impact induction instead, swapping invigoration for traction on a controller user, and obviously making changes next season with the new artifact mod. And that is going to be pretty much the end of the video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions or concerns. If you see a question down there you can answer, please help me out. I'm still trying to get to a lot of different comments. And of course, if you are seeing this video next season, let me know how things have changed. The new aspect doing really well. Is there something else, a new weapon that is really doing well, like a new exotic? Please let me know in the comments so we can change this build and use it for the next season. And of course, big shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Without their support, videos like this, and more specifically the spreadsheets, would not be possible because I make no money off of them and they take so much time. So more specifically, I want to give a big shout out to Medibuju, Mom Dad, Shadow Moon, Joe Smith, Monday, Nelly, Halvin, Steve Octopus, Tristan, Rev, Raymond Showman, and Unipanther for their support on Patreon. And of course, I hope you guys have a fantastic day.